The Committee of the Whole is back from recess. We are still on Bill number 66-36 as substituted, and we will now be entertaining amendments. There is one amendment on the drive at this time. This is Amendment L5P3. Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The amendment I'd like to proffer is on line 15, page 3. It's to add qualifying certificate QC holders shall report annually QC benefits in the form as prescribed by the Department of Revenue and Taxation. And so this amendment was basically inspired by the conversation that took place in regards to, how do we determine effectiveness of QCs? And part of that is having a cumulative, a running total of what the, I guess, tax credits or the type of tax incentives that these companies are getting. And it would help DRT in, I guess, knowing how much is being used. So it's really about just keeping track of all the QCs that are being, at least with this part of law, keeping track of the QC tax benefits.
Thank you. On the amendment, are there any objections? Would you like to speak on the amendment? Senator San Agustin, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just trying to understand the amendment, but I'm in support of the amendment. But with the statement of the author, what benefits? I think we all need to understand when you write off a tax, you have to identify what you're writing off. When you're coming from a QC, you have to be very specific. If you're going to write off a tax from property tax, then so be it. So revenue and tax, I think the key is going to be with this amendment. Hopefully, it will trigger revenue and tax to create that reporting mechanism to make sure that if they're saying they're doing the GRT, then they write it that this is the GRT percentage. They go into BBT and whatever, and maybe that will generate them to create that form. But otherwise, in general, I'm in support of this amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Agustin. On the amendment, would you like to close? Are there any objections? Hearing none, amendment passes. That is the last amendment for Bill 66-36. Sorry. Senator Torres, you are recognized.
Madam Chair, notwithstanding the House rules, I move to reconsider the actions of the body on Bill number 206-36 as amended by the Committee on General Government Operations, Appropriations, and Housing.
Okay.
No?
Okay, there's been a motion, notwithstanding the rules, to reconsider the actions of the body on Bill number
206.
On Bill number 206. Are there any objections? Hearing no objections, there has been an objection. All those in favor of reconsidering the actions of the body on Bill 206-36, please signify by raising your hand. Motion passes. You are recognized, Senator Torres.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Torres, I'll ask that you please hold on your motion, and we will dispose of Bill 66 first, and we'll come back to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Moylan, would you like to close on Bill 66 and then move it to the third reading?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Appreciate the discussion on Bill 66. As we've seen in our discussions from starting with 2 public hearings and a couple more committee as a whole, we've heard from Department of Administration that really specified how this investment into the special QC for these hotel expansions will greatly improve our economy. We heard from Department of Revenue and Taxation, who is in favor of the job creation and again of the tax that will be received through the growing of our tourism industry. We've heard from GITA that really supports this and the vision of creating the ultimate goal of the hotel rooms being 1,600. And we also heard from Guam Visitors Bureau that supports this bill as well. This bill is about the economics of our island and creating new jobs. And I appreciate my colleagues' discussion in this, and I ask for their support. And Madam Chair, if I may, I would also like to make just one quick final amendment to also add in co-sponsors to this bill, if I'm not out of line in our process here.
You may proceed, Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In addition to the co-sponsor, the next co-sponsor I wish to include will be yourself, Madam Chair, Senator Amanda Shelton, Senator Talina Nelson, Senator Chris Duenas, Senator Tony Ada, Senator Joe San Augustine, Senator Mary Torres, and Senator Joanne Brown as co-sponsors. And if I left anyone out, please let me know. I'll be happy to include.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. On the motion to add co-sponsors to Bill number 66-36, are there any objections? Motion passes. Thank you very much, Senator Moylan. And a motion to place the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that Bill number 6636, Core, as amended by the Committee on Economic Development, Agriculture, Power and Energy Utilities, and the Arts, and substituted and amended in the Committee of the Whole with the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole to be placed on the third reading file. Madam Chair.
On the motion that it be placed on the third reading file with the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole, hearing no objections, motion carries. Senator Torres, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to place Bill number 206-36LS as amended by the Committee on General Government Operations, Appropriations, and Housing with the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole into the third reading voting file.
On the motion that it be placed on the third reading voting file with the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole, are there any objections? There has been an objection. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Motion passes. We will take a moment's recess. We are back from recess. We will now move to Bill number 214, and we will take a moment's recess to welcome the panel.
Okay, we're going to go in soon. The committee is back from recess. Senator Shelton, you're recognized.
Situus Masi, Mr. Chair, I move to accept the substitute version of Bill number 214-36 COR, an act to appropriate $25 million from the general fund to the Department of Administration to amend Section 8 of Part 2, Chapter 13, Public Law 36-54, relative to increasing the general fund transfer authority for fiscal year 2022 of Imagahagan Guahan, all for the purpose of implementing the Local Employers Assistance Program, LEAP, as established by Executive Order 2021-25, and to cite this act as the Local Employers Assistance Program, LEAP Act of 2021.
On that motion, any objections? Seeing none, motion carries.
Situus Masi, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on this bill. I want to thank our colleagues who have signed on as co-sponsors of this measure, Senator San Augustin, Vice Speaker Tina Muñoz-Barnes, Senators Nelson, Pito Terlahi, yourself, Perez, Torres, Moylan, and Atta. Mr. Chair, after meeting with representatives from the tourism business sector, the Committee on Tourism made a commitment to these businesses to have requested assistance from our island leaders. And these business leaders from our tourism sector called on us to work together. And the LEAP Act is the result of the collaboration of our island's leadership that demonstrates our commitment to keep our people working and carry our businesses through this difficult time. I want to thank these tourism sector partners for their continued efforts despite these difficult circumstances. Bill number 214-36, or the Local Employers Assistance Program, LEAP, commits local funds to help businesses most impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and ensure employees keep their jobs. The measure appropriates $25 million from the general fund to the Department of Administration for the Local Employers Assistance Program established by Executive Order 2021-25 and will act as a local match for the Governor's commitment of $25 million in American Rescue Plan ARP Act funding towards the LEAP program, totaling a $50 million investment in Guam's employees and businesses. This measure will allow more of our island's businesses to avail of loans from the Guam Economic Development Authority to mitigate financial hardship while supporting payroll and benefits costs and costs to retain employees. And I emphasize the need to keep our people working. The LEAP helps to create an environment for Guam's businesses most affected by the pandemic that fosters employee retention and helps them on a path to recovery. We already know that many of our businesses were temporarily or permanently closed due to the effects of the pandemic, but I want to further emphasize that these adverse impacts were felt more by our economic sectors than others. Within the tourism sector, 7% of businesses permanently closed, and some businesses resorted to employee furloughs or permanent layoffs, according to a University of Guam study. And at this bill's public hearing last month, I reiterated that this measure helps businesses to retain their employees. It provides an additional incentive for businesses to bring previously furloughed employees into the workplace and to further help our most impacted businesses during this time. I submitted that I was open to increasing the appropriation of this bill if there is a call to do so. The more of our people we can get back to work, the better. With that, Mr. Chair, I move that we accept the substitute version of this bill, and I thank my colleagues for accepting it, and I'll speak on that substitute version, which has two major changes. And one, that is the inclusion of an increase to the governor's fiscal year 2022 general fund transfer authority from 5% to 10% as a funding source for the implementation of the LEAP, and the inclusion of a timeline for the reporting requirement under the bill as 60 days after the expenditure of all dedicated funds for the LEAP. This version also includes changes as to grammar, format, and style, as was recommended by our legal bureau. Mr. Chair, I want to also thank our partners here today who are a part of this panel for their support and assistance in developing this legislation and the help that they will provide moving forward to carry out the LEAP. And I want to thank in advance our colleagues who have also been supportive of these businesses and employees who we're all trying to keep working in our community. I look forward to today's discussion to help strengthen this bill and move it forward for our people. So just Masi, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. And just to clarify, we've already moved the motion to accept the bill as substituted, already passed. So
Yes.
now I will call the Sergeant at Arms to please swear in the panel members. Okay, I've been told that they're already all sworn in, so we will begin now with the first round. Again, there will be 3 rounds of discussion. First 2 rounds for questions for the members of the panel. And each senator will be allotted 5 minutes for questions, not including responses. The third and final round will be for any amendments. Just again, for the record, if I could have all the members of the panel, beginning to my far left, introduce themselves just once more for the record.
My name is Vanessa Valencia. I'm a budget analyst at the Office of Finance and Budget.
Edward Byrne, Director, Department of Administration.
Melanie Mendiola, Administrator and CEO of the Guam Economic Development Authority.
Ed Camacho, Business and Economic Development Manager for the Guam Economic Development Authority.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll begin with Senator Moylan. You're recognized. Senator Duenas.
Jesus Masi, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly support the intent of this bill, but I have to say that I'm a little disappointed. I was hoping that the request that many of these tourism businesses has made to the governor and to this legislature as well would have met with a favorable recognition of the ARP funds and to use that funding source. But we're here now, so I need to ask a couple of questions based on the public hearing that took place. So I guess, Mr. Byrne, I understand that you're also representing BBMR today?
Yes, Senator.
So, Mr. Byrne, BBMR represented, I believe it's in the committee report, Mr. Carlson made 2 observations that I was a little concerned with. One was, he basically stated that the anticipated unaudited $60-some-odd million of surplus from the prior fiscal year, prior to now, 2021, would be the more likely source for the funding. But then he went on to state several commitments to that funding source that currently exist. This legislature passed the $20 million set aside for the tax refunds. I believe the $10 million is anticipated to come from there for the additional war claims, and several other commitments that have been made. I believe by the time he was done, there was an approximation of $9 million possibly available for this program. Other than that, it would be under the structure of the budget as passed with all of the revenue committed. Can you comment on that, please?
Yes, sir. Thank you, for asking the question, but maybe I can address it the other way. And let me start off with the comment that you made that there's a $60 million budget surplus. There's a $60 million excess of revenues over budget revenues. There are all sorts of adjustments that need to be made to the general fund in order to determine what the actual surplus, and it's still looking as though there's going to be a surplus, but there are lots of adjustments yet to be made to actually determine what the final audited surplus is going to be. With respect to the tax refunds, in the audited statements, they're already there. So although funds were appropriated for that, you don't need to take account of that in the mental calculation of what the eventual fund surplus is going to be. The financial statements include all the tax refunds, both those that remain unpaid for previous years for a number of reasons, and those that we accrue for the year that is yet to be paid, right? So we're already accruing in the financial statements for the tax refunds that are going to be paid out starting in January or February. So you don't need to take account of that twice, even though an appropriation was made. Yes, some recognition has to be made for the fact that the war claims are also going to be paid out of the general fund. That was in the bill. Since he spoke to you on that matter, we've had the first CRER for fiscal year 22. And that revealed that we actually did pretty well in tax collections. I know it's only 1 month, but we did pretty well in tax collections for that month. And the CRER estimate of the eventual, using their projections of the eventual collections for fiscal 2022, their BBMR's projection showed that we were going to collect 11.5 million more, and that's only based on 1 month's receipts, 11.5 million more than budgeted. I think you know that it was the position of the administration that GRT receipts were going to be higher than were included in the budget as passed. And maybe we're already starting to see that to some extent.
So I'm going to follow on that real quick and then ask another follow-up. I was actually surprised to see the governor's statement in commenting on that CRER, but by basically saying it was the legislature adopting a very conservative revenue of $50 million less in general fund BPT appropriations that have allowed for this success. So thank you, 36 Guam Legislature. So Mr. Byrne, you're saying then, because I think some members of our body might have a bone of contention with regard to how you see the 20 million having been appropriated and already accounted for in what's currently going on with accounting. The design of that set aside was to have revenue in excess of what's being set aside in order to be able to facilitate a faster turnaround payment in tax refunds in the light of the current situation that we may be facing or probably are facing in terms of individuals needing as much of their money to be received in a timely fashion, given the fact of unemployment and PUA and all the other representations. And so are you saying then that that's not going to be recognized by BBMR and Department of Administration as an appropriated funding source strictly for tax refunds?
Well, yeah, it is, and it has been, but it doesn't affect the way that the surplus is calculated, which is what you were asking me. And Senator, our tax refunds are being paid really fast now. I don't know that we can go any faster than we're already going. We're paying them out, within weeks of filing. So I think we've achieved the legislature's purpose in that respect.
So then your representation is there should be more than enough cash to cover this $25 million request without any changes in the, because the only proposed change in here is transfer authority. We are not raising revenues in any other category or anything else so your statement today and now is that this bill is sound and has funding behind it.
May I state what I'm saying in my own words, because I think it's slightly different from what you just said. All of us here, at the time of the budget, and as we're sitting in front of you now, we're here in December. We've got 1 month's results from the CRER, which look hopeful, but we're all working on budgets and forecasts for the remainder of the financial year. And most of the members of this committee at the time of the budget reiterated that there's a fair amount of uncertainty associated with the expected receipts for fiscal 22 because of the situation with the public health emergency. I see on the legislative agenda a number of other bills appropriating funds out of the general fund. I don't think there's enough funding from what I can see, just adding these different bills up in my head, to accommodate every bill that's on the legislature's agenda. But prudently, if we're just looking at this one and the war claims one, I'm confident that those two bills will be able to be funded out of the funds that are available from last year and this year.
So just for the record, Mr. Chairman, and I guess the Chairman on Finance will make his own comment, but we are not forwarding any introduced bills at this time unless the EITC recognition, from what I understand, is the funding source that is the 2020. We went back and forth on that during the budget discussion, Mr. Byrne. I'm not going to go that much further. As to say, bills introduced and bills on the floor are two different things. I know you're very aware of that. So you're basically saying use your discipline. If this 25 million passes, then but your statement is you feel comfortable if this was a standalone at this point, that the budget would carry through and be able to support this appropriation.
Yes, I am aware of the distinction, Senator. I thought I should mention it because I think it's important that any remarks that I make aren't interpreted that there's an unlimited amount of funding out of the general fund.
Most certainly, and that's why we're battling amongst ourselves to ensure that that funding source is reflective of fiscal year 2020 in terms of the first batch of EITC reimbursement. With my last 30 seconds, Gita, Mel, has the 25 million that the governor has committed been loaded over to Gita already for this program, the first 25 million for the LEAP?
I think that's a better question for DOA, but yes, as far as we know, it has been.
Yes,
DOA,
Senator,
yes.
it's in the report that we just recently released.
So is Gita actively engaged with that program then, since the money is loaded?
No, Senator, we are currently not engaged in the program. As I think I had stated on the record during the hearing, from our calculations to make this program meaningful for the businesses whom it is meant to impact, we were seeking a funding level of $50 million for this program. So if we were to not receive a $50 million level of funding for this program, then the program would certainly change in nature, and from there, we can't. It's once you hit go and businesses start submitting all their documentation, you don't really want to change up the information on them or give them false hope about what they could receive if you're not quite ready yet with what you have to offer.
I'll discuss that a little more with my next 5 minutes, but I'm going to say that these businesses are in trouble, and I would hope that we could consider a phased-in approach. For the balance of this time that I've had, Mr. Chairman, we'll carry on.
Mr. Chair, if I may?
Thank you. Senator Duenas.
Mr. Chair, point of...
Senator, do you have a point of information?
Or point of inquiry, Mr. Chair, do we have a fiscal note for this substituted version? A fiscal note?
One moment.
Thank you.
My understanding is that there's only there's a fiscal note on the original version, not necessarily on the substitute version.
Mr. Chair, I think that, because it's substituted, has there been a request to BBMR to provide us a fiscal note for this? I guess the author of the legislation has made an attempt to get a fiscal note so we can see the difference. I mean, it's been a substantial change. And is there anything in the rules and reg requiring a fiscal note when it's substantially changed? Maybe we can ask legal?
Yeah, so
Okay.
real quick, are you making a point of order on whether or not we should proceed with discussions in the bill until there's a fiscal note?
Why don't we ask legal? Can I take a 1-minute recess to ask legal? Or maybe if you can, Mr. Chair, to ask legal, what's the procedure moving forward on fiscal notes that are substantially changed on a bill?
Well, I'm going to ask you to make a point of order because we're now out of order. The next person to speak was Senator Torres. So if you have those questions you'd like to ask when it's your turn, you can ask it, unless you are making a point of order.
Okay, point of order, Mr. Chair. I'd like to see that before we move forward, that we receive a fiscal note for a bill that's substantially different compared to the original bill that was introduced. And if there's any questions, that we seek legal advice, okay?
Moment's recess. We're back from recess. After discussing the matter with legal, it is my ruling that this bill does not require another fiscal note, so we will continue because the original bill had a fiscal note.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, based on 2 Guam Code Annotated Legislative Branch, Chapter 9, Fiscal Accountability Act of 1999, Section 9108, Revision of Fiscal Note states, in the event that a bill is amended or substituted while in committee for a fiscal note or waiver thereof have been previously obtained and for which the change have a physical impact or additional physical impact from that reported on the previously obtained fiscal note or waiver thereof, the standing committee shall obtain a revised fiscal note following the same process outlined in this chapter. The time limit set forth in 9105 of this chapter shall apply to this section. Mr. Chair, this is law, so
if you would like to challenge the ruling of the chair, you may.
Mr. Chair, we're setting a precedence here. You're allowing certain bills to get through, especially in the committee of the whole where it deals with
This is not a
finances.
debate.
So
This is not a debate. You either make a motion or not. The chair has ruled. You can make a motion to challenge the ruling of the chair.
okay, then I challenge the rule of the chair and object, Mr. Chair.
All those in favor of the motion indicate by raising your hand.
What motion?
What motion?
She's challenging the rule of the chair.
It's not a motion.
All those in favor of her challenge of the ruling? Overruling the chair.
Can you
Seeing
repeat
none,
that, please?
fails.
Yes. Mr. Chair, can you please do it again? Because we're kind of confused the way you're announcing it. You're even unsure how to say it. So can you please say it again? For
Please.
the record.
Mr. Chair,
Please.
For the
your
record.
ruling is that there's no fiscal note required for a substitute bill? That
Yes.
has fiscal impact?
There is already again, this is not a debate. I've made a ruling. If you would like to overrule
Chair,
the
this is
chair,
the law.
you can vote.
This is the law. This is the Guam Code Annotated.
There is interpretation of law. You are out of order. There is interpretation of law. I have discussed the interpretation of this law with legal, and I have made my ruling based on my discussions
Okay,
with legal.
and then I'll
If you would
object.
like to discuss
Yes.
it with legal as well, you are more than welcome to.
Okay.
Right now, the chair has made a ruling. If you would like to overrule the chair, you can, which you have attempted to do. All those in favor of
Can you
overruling the
please
chair?
repeat, can you please state your ruling, Mr. Chair? What, I'm asking you if you've ruled that there's
There
no
was a
fiscal
point of
note required
order.
for
There
this
was a
bill?
point of order made that we were out of order because it was lacking a fiscal note. I have ruled that we are now out of order with proceeding with this bill. So, all those in favor of overruling the chair's ruling, signify by raising your hand. Overruling fails.
Point of order,
Senator-
Mr. Chair.
Point of order, Senator
Yes,
Talahi, you're
there are
recognized.
several things in law that require us, when we're deliberating fiscal bills, to determine the fiscal impact. One of them is the fiscal note law that says when a bill is substituted, that there should be a new fiscal note to show the fiscal impacts of the substitute bill. There's also a statute that says that we should fund every mandate that we are passing by law, and we need to determine that by having a fiscal note. So whether you think it's required or not, I am asking that we get a fiscal note so that we can determine the fiscal impacts and whether this is mandated. We also have a standing rule that requires determination of whether this funding source is sufficient. And I think it's clear the bill, as it has been substituted, I have no objection to the substitute version, but I would like to know the fiscal impact so that we can proceed.
Madam Speaker, you've made the same point of order that was previously made, and I made a ruling on the
disagree.
same. You've made the same point of order that was
I'm
previously made,
asking
and
that a fiscal note be prepared, Mr. Chair. We have all the people here who can prepare this for us. If they could just do that, then we could proceed. We just need to know, in changing the language from a general fund
Madam Speaker,
appropriation
that's not necessarily a point of order.
to
You're now
transfer
making.
authority, what's the
It sounds
impacts are
like you're
going to
making
be
a
on these
motion.
agencies where they're going to transfer the money out of?
There's a fiscal note that's with the original bill. The question is, and it was already made and already ruled upon. So now, are you making a motion? It's not your turn to
Making a
motion yet,
motion
though. The
that we
next
comply
person-
with law, that we make sure our mandates are funded, that we comply with our standing rules, that make sure that there is a sufficient funding source for the bills that we are going to pass, and that when we are in committee of the whole, we make sure we do that. And I'm asking that because the bill as substituted has a different fiscal impact, it allows transfer from agencies, and I want to know the impact on those agencies. Yes, I'm asking that you instruct the panel to please prepare, or BBMR to prepare a fiscal note. And Mr. Burns here for BBMR, so I think that should.
So that is a motion, is that a motion to recess so that a fiscal note can be prepared before we continue?
If we need to recess, the other one was one paragraph long. Whatever they need, yes.
Okay.
Mr.
Mr.
Chair, I
Chair.
object to that motion. We have the panel of experts here. We have Mr. Byrne representing BBMR. We can certainly ask the questions that you want to ask about any fiscal impact here on the floor right now. We don't have to delay this discussion.
There's an objection on the motion. All those in favor of the motion signify by raising your hand. Motion fails.
Point of personal privilege, Mr. Chair. For
State
the
your point of,
record,
state your point of personal privilege.
thank you, Mr. Chair. We're moving down a slippery slope here, especially when it comes to finances. Right now, it's raining funds everywhere. But next
Point of
year,
order,
when
Mr. Chair. Point of order, that is not
this is a personal
in
point of
accordance
privilege
with the
that I
standing
will
rules,
not,
Mr. Chair.
I will not stand, and I'm making it a point here for the record, as a point of personal privilege, that I don't agree to what you were stating, that you're setting precedents, Mr. Chair, when it's clearly what I read to you from law about these physical, not just in law, but also in physical note,
Fiscal.
that I do not condone what you're doing. And for future reference, when things come up like this again, and why we don't have enough money in this legislature to pay for school children, to pay for buses, to pay for public health, it's because we were not doing our due diligence financially to ensure that there is funding to go through. We don't need to start sending out these wonderful bills that are going to pay for everything under the sky just to be shot down and put hopes into people's hearts that there's money to pay for it. So for the record, Mr. Chair, as a point of personal privilege, I do not condone what you're doing and object to what you're doing.
Okay, for the record, I've made it clear that this was discussed with legal counsel, the interpretation of the law that you read. Let's please get back in order, and please make your motions in the proper order. So with that, we will proceed. Next is Senator Torres. You're recognized.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
State your point of order.
Thank you. The point of order is the materially different substitute version of the bill. I don't think it had a public hearing, but it changes the funding source and allows transfer, actually changes the budget bill, allows transfer authority to change in our budget from 5 to 10. This will have impact on agencies that we've not heard a single word about, and I think we should know the impact if we're going to consider this. And I think that's the purpose of the materially different. So I would challenge that it is materially different.
Okay, I'll take your point of order into consideration. A moment's recess while I discuss with legal. Okay, we are back from recess after discussing the point of order that was made with legal. I will rule that this bill is materially different.
Object. I challenge the, I'll challenge the chair.
You're objecting to the bill being
No.
materially different?
Oh, I'm sorry. My
There's an
bad.
objection on the floor. All
No,
those in
no,
favor?
no, I withdraw.
Signify
I
by
withdraw.
raising.
I withdraw, Mr.
Objection
Chair.
withdrawn.
Oh my gosh, this is not jungle rules here. Come on, let's get it together, people. We got people watching
Excuse
us.
me,
Point of
you
order.
made an objection.
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Senator Sanagzi,
You know-
you're recognized.
If you want to make a statement, it's not jungle rule, then don't treat it like jungle rules. Don't speak unless you've been recognized. You shouldn't have made a comment. You caused the jungle to come in.
Mr. Chair.
All right? Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Shelton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to withdraw the substitute version of Bill 214 and for us to revert to the original version of the bill for this discussion.
There's a motion to withdraw the substitute version and revert to the original version of the bill. On that motion, are there any objections? Seeing none, motion carries. We are now on the original bill, and we will start again from the beginning. There will be 3 rounds. First 2 rounds for questions, last round for amendments. Senator Moylan, you're recognized on this first round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No
Can you
questions.
just
Thank you,
make
Mr.
sure
Chair.
the
Let's
original
proceed.
bill is uploaded, Mr. Chair? And
We'll take a moment's recess. Okay, we are back from recess. The Bill 214-36 COR has been uploaded. Again, this is the original version and not the substitute version. We'll go through 3 rounds, 2 rounds for questions, 1 round for the 3rd round for amendments. We'll begin with Senator James Moylan. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No questions. Thank you.
Senator Dueñas.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chairman, I guess for purposes of redoing, I'll shorten it up and ask the questions that I asked earlier. We'll start with Mr. Byrne. First of all, just a short statement. I'm disappointed in this effort. I think that we could find those resources within ARP. I don't think we should be going after general fund revenues. However, having said that, I don't want to, be an impediment whatsoever to very critical businesses that need to be supported going forward under the LEAP program. It is a very, very noble and the right thing to do in terms of making sure that those businesses survive the pandemic and are here to provide services or opportunities for our guests when they return to Guam. Mr. Byrne, once again going back, during the public hearing, BBMR represented that, and I'll be a little bit more emphatic, the unaudited potential surplus balance from fiscal year 2021 may be upwards of $60+ million. There has been an appropriation in the fiscal 2022 budget for any surpluses up to $20 million to be recognized for tax refunds in the hope to expedite tax refunds issuances. There is an additional $10 million recognized at a minimum for the war claims program and other things that have been of note during BBMR's testimony on the bill. And the figure that was essentially arrived at as a potential funding source was quite short with regard to the $25 million proposed in this bill. I believe BBMR's representation, and I'm sure it's in the committee report, would be somewhere around $9 million, quite a bit short of the $25 million. Can you explain how the effect on the general fund revenue as proposed in this bill, and also, most especially now, which is something after your last representation, I was just going to go in and take away the transfer authority anyways because it doesn't sound like it's necessary. How does this affect now the general fund budget and the capability of supporting this bill and what it calls for on the $25 million appropriation?
Okay, thank you, Senator. There were many questions wrapped up in that comment, so maybe hopefully you'll allow me to take my time to unravel some of those questions.
Certainly will, sir.
Okay, the fiscal note that came from BBMR its last sentence concludes, there's an approximate balance of $19.8 million in unobligated general fund revenues at the end of fiscal 21. I think you might have mentioned 9, it's actually 19 according to the fiscal note. In addition to that, I made the point before that the amounts that are appropriated to the tax refunds are already recognized in the general fund balance that's reported in the financial statements. So there's 2 separate things going on here. There's an appropriation of revenues, but there's also the fact that the general fund balance, as reported, includes all the tax refunds as estimated that will be paid during the year. They're already included on the balance sheet. So for the purposes of the fund balance, you don't have to take account of them again. In addition to that, I also mentioned that if you're looking forward to fiscal 22 revenues, the CRER for October already represented that there was a or there is likely to be a surplus of revenues over the appropriated revenues in fiscal '22. That will go into the general fund too and would be available for the payment of these amounts under the LEAP bill if passed. Based upon these sources of revenues, assuming, as I wanted to emphasize, assuming that no further calls are made upon the general fund through other bills being passed by this body, because there's no there's no way that you can determine which comes first. I mean, expenditures arise when they do. So we want to make sure that we limit the amount of appropriations from the general fund balance, and you'll probably find not many people more conservative and prudent than me. So, you know, that's why I wanted to make sure that everybody understood that there is a limit to the number of bills that you can use to appropriate from the general fund. But based upon what we know now, I am confident that we can fund this, this amount that's required, this matching amount, out of the local funds to pay the LEAP benefits out to businesses.
So I'm going to make an attempt then to summarize what you've just stated for the comfort level, at least of myself, perhaps this body. So taking into account, using the general fund as the funding source, the potential unaudited surplus from fiscal year 2021 and the current tracking of fiscal year 2022, this legislature, and it is your statement, is not over-appropriating, misappropriating, putting out of kilter or balance the current general fund by passing this legislation. Your representation is there will be adequate funding to fund this bill.
Yes, Senator, based upon what we know now, and in all these discussions, whether the budget or this bill, I mean, we're looking at forecasts, but we're looking at them prudently. Based upon that, yes, I am confident.
Mr. Chairman, as I said earlier, and I think the budget chair will make this announcement probably during his time, but so of the bills that Mr. Burns speaks that seek to appropriate funds, particularly from EITC reimbursements and the like, they will not move forward unless there is a verification that that funding source is related to a 2020 refund from EITC, which would be subject to appropriation by this body. So I heed Mr. Burns' advice, but I don't think this body will handle that part of it. So I'm going to take his on-the-record representation that the funding source is available, at least for consideration of this bill. So going back to Gita, Melanie, once again, I just wanted to reiterate for the record, now that we're on this bill, it's really the same bill without the transfer authority. But so your representation, once again, has the money. I'll go back to Mr. Byrne. Mr. Byrne, has the $25 million from ARP been loaded to Gita or in the fund for the purposes of this program? The governor's commitment of ARP, $25 million?
Yes, Senator, you can see on the report that we submitted a few days ago, the $25 million is there.
Okay. So Melanie, once again, just for going through this process again, has Gita stood up the program and started working with the businesses for distribution, at least of the first $25 million?
Gita has not. While we have put together all the relevant documentation, we're in the midst of just reviews, legal reviews, et cetera, for the board's eventual adoption of the standard operating procedures. We have not started working on the program. We have not rolled out the program. I had mentioned before, and I'll mention it again, we didn't believe that it was prudent to launch an underfunded program. When we spoke to the stakeholders involved over the course of 3 different meetings. We spoke to over 50 stakeholders who expressed their need for meaningful assistance at the level of 25 million. That looks very similar to the current program that we currently are running, which is our 2021 Small Business Pandemic Assistance Grant. And so in order for us to run a meaningful program that would help those most affected by the pandemic, a funding level at $50 million was what we had proposed. And so we would not be able to do a $25 million program unless we further restricted it, and so further restricted it as far as the number of people eligible, the number of businesses eligible, or the amounts given out. So therein lies why we were awaiting final resolution one way or the other here.
Okay, Chairman, Mr. Chairman, that's the extent of my questions for this round. Jesus Masi.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. Senator Nelson?
I don't have any questions at this time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Speaker Chalahi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm very curious about Mr. Burns' interpretation of the fiscal note that was provided to us by BBMR on the bill. BBMR used the September 2021 CRER. That's the end of the fiscal year for 2021. And BBMR very clearly stated that there was 19.8 million in unobligated general fund revenues at the end of FY21. They said they came up with 19.8 because they needed to account for the 20 million that was appropriated for tax refunds, because that was not reflected in the CRER. So they accounted for it. They accounted for 1.5 million in deficit, and they came up with 19.8. And you failed to, and the 19.8 was prior to passage of the war claims bill, so it did not account for the 10 million, which is what my colleague was referring to, how we ended up with the 9.8. 19.8 minus the 10 million for war claims was 9.8. And these were, if we have 9.8 million, and we're trying to reach a $25 million goal, you know, I am concerned about that. And I think the fiscal note made it very clear that there was not enough to reach 25 million. But Mr. Byrne is today saying that BBMR's fiscal note accounting was wrong or something, and that we don't need to account for the 20 million that was very clearly set forth in the budget bill. And he's also talking about using FY22 general fund revenues. He's calling them excess revenues. But we have not increased FY22's projection of revenues. I mean, are you able, before, you know, when we tried to appropriate 10 million excess revenues to the hospital, that was completely shot down. None of the money was transferred. But you're saying now that you can continue during FY22 to use excess revenues, or what you deem excess revenues, on a monthly basis? Are you able to do that prior to the end of the fiscal year?
Senator, you made reference to the 10 million. I mean, that was a different situation altogether. I interpret this bill as a new appropriation.
As a what?
As a new appropriation.
Yes.
It's an appropriation from the general fund. Therefore, the question arises, how much money in the general fund is there to be appropriated? And I explained that there is, after taking account of all that needs to be taken account of for fiscal 21, and the general fund balance already takes account of the tax refunds. That's not to say that it's not an appropriate appropriation. It might well be. But the general fund balance already includes it, so it doesn't need to be counted twice.
But you're
Having-
saying that BBMR was incorrect in their fiscal note, that they were wrong?
No, no, Senator. They're talking about unobligated general fund revenues. I'm talking about the general fund balance. And there's a difference. So, if I can continue?
So you're saying we should trash this fiscal note because it's not relevant for us anymore, and we should use some general fund balance? I've not seen those numbers at all.
I went on to say that there's the CRER for October disclosed, and this is something that came out after this fiscal note, but was issued by BBMR, disclosed the current assessment that there will be an additional 11.5 million general fund revenues in fiscal 22, and that would be available to pay, to contribute to the payment of the local match for this program. So adding it all together, which is what Senator Duenas asked me, I am confident, assuming no other charges on the general fund, that the general fund will be able to bear this amount.
If you're able to use FY20, so you want to use the FY22 revenues right now. So the BBMR was only talking about FY21 revenues at the end of the year, and you want us to use FY22 revenues without increasing the FY22 revenue projection. That means we're like deficit spending from the start.
But it's not a deficit.
Spending, according to you, 11 million over what we have projected to bring in.
Well, I think you know that there was the position of the administration that the fiscal 22 revenues were underestimated.
But that was not adopted.
Yes.
So we normally use budgets that are adopted by law, and we don't just make them up as we go along. So that's what I'm saying. That's what they call deficit spending, spending over the budgeted amount, right? Or the revenue projected amount. That's how we got into deficit spending before. But
well,
okay, I have some other questions then.
May I just say that that's not exactly what I would recognize to be deficit spending. Deficit spending is when you spend a deficit.
So you're saying it's okay for us to just continue to spend general fund, to say our source of funding is the general fund, without accounting on the revenue side for, so the revenue that we've projected is 125 million, and we can spend 250 million because you are projecting to receive that amount, but that's not what the budget says?
No,
I guess I have a big issue with that. This is something I've never heard of before, that we're going to spend over the budget.
I didn't say that, Senator. I said this was a new appropriation, and you and Senator Duenas were asking me, were the funds available for this new appropriation? And I believe they are.
So you're saying there's $11 million in FY22 general fund that you want us to use because you've recognized that as excess during the first 2 months or 3 months of the first month of fiscal year 2022. You want us to use that excess amount now and add that to the 9.8 from FY21. Is the FY21 amount, if we just say we're appropriating from the general fund, is this FY21 money still available to be appropriated like that after the end of the fiscal year? No one has.
Well, that's the purpose of the bill. It will appropriate it or not,
It appropriates from the general fund. So are we able to, if we say appropriate from the general fund, you're able to go to any fiscal year you want and pull that money out?
Well, that's what you do with continuing appropriations. So I don't actually see the difference.
Speaker, your time
Yeah, but
is
that's not
expired.
what we're doing. There's no language of that here. Pardon?
Time's expired.
Thank you.
Senator Perez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question's for Director Byrne. So I know the question was asked earlier, but if you can confirm, what is the status of the revenues thus far? I know there's a report coming out in December, but do you have any preliminary information regarding, what are we receiving? Because I know in September it was above 62 million in excess, with a 20.7 million shortfall in special funds. So do we have an update on the CRER is basically what I'm asking.
I only have the CRER, Senator, for October. We're working on the CRER for November, but it's too early for me to be able to speak on that.
Okay. The other thing is transfer authority. To your knowledge, has there been any transfers that have taken place since the beginning of this budget, since this fiscal year?
For fiscal 22?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any transfers.
And to your understanding, what is that amount, based on the current budget law, what amount is allowed by law?
Well, the budget, bless you, yes, the budget allows 5%.
Yeah, so what is that dollar amount?
It's roughly 700 million. So that's something like 35 million.
Okay. And then I'm looking at the latest income tax refund status report. There's still outstanding returns that still need to be paid. Would that be resolved relatively quickly?
Certainly, it will be resolved as soon as the returns are in a state that are appropriate to be paid. DRT reports all the returns they receive, whether they're in a status that's available to be paid or not. As soon as, and this happens weekly, as I think you have been able to see over the last few months, as soon as DRT determines that there's a refund due, they send the report to me, and I think without exception, we've been able to pay that out in the following week.
Yeah, I think generally I am interested in what the finances of the government are to be able to, pay for this. So that's why it's so important that we maybe perhaps get an update on the CRER sooner than later. Because, the question is then where are we going to take the money from? Which agency are we going to take the money from if there's no excess or if there's a diminishing amount of funds? So can you confirm too regarding the EITC refund? So I think there was a lot of interest in that here in the legislature trying to appropriate that money. Do you know what the status of that money is? Has it come?
No, it hasn't come. It was discussed in general terms with U.S. Treasury. It's going to come. There's no doubt about that. But it hasn't reached us yet, nor any other territory.
Is there a potential to use that funding for this particular program?
Well, again, just like I was responding to Senator Duenas, you've got to be. There is a potential, but please remember what you've already appropriated out of that funding, and there was a large amount appropriated to pay for the hospital debt service and the DOC debt service. So, yes, there's a potential, and in reality, I think what you're asking is, can you put together a whole lot of little amounts available? And the answer is yes. But I don't actually see that being an issue at the moment, based upon what we know now. We can only act on what we know now. And that surely is the purpose of having a CRER, that it allows us to take a view on the current year's finances.
The pot of money that I'm talking about is the 2021 reimbursements. So for the EITC, are you familiar with that one?
Yeah, that's the 2021 tax returns. That's the reimbursement will come in 2022.
Right, but for the 2021, so DRT normally, we foot the bill for 2021, and there was supposed to be some reimbursement for that, from my
Yeah.
understanding. So that's the amount, the money that I'm asking about, not the 2022, but the 2021.
But that's the same, Senator. The reimbursement that we expect to receive from Treasury in 2022 is in respect of fiscal 21 tax refunds that will be paid out in 2022.
Okay. Maybe this is a question for the OFB. Maybe I can direct this question to OFB. So yeah, what is your understanding in regards to the 2021 reimbursement from the federal government?
Thank you, Senator. As for that question, I really don't have much information on it. I believe that Mr. Byrne would have the best answer to that. So for more information, I'll just get back to you because I wouldn't have that information with me right now.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I'll follow up with that. Yep. I think that's my questions for this round. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Senator Shelton. Senator Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I mean, my main question that I have, I'm sure all of us do, is does the administration have any recommendations so far on how they anticipate or where they anticipate finding this funding if we authorize it in the budget? I think it's a practical question we all have. Has that been discussed, or do we have any thoughts if we were to authorize this funding?
Well, Senator, it's not in the budget. This bill makes a new appropriation of these funds.
No, I understand, but I'm sure there's been collaboration. I'm sure this bill didn't come out of nowhere. Has there been any discussion on what the administration would look at in prioritizing how to identify where this funding would be? If we simply authorize the money, do you anticipate where you will look at taking the money from current operations?
Well, I think I just tried to answer that, is that some of it will come from as per the fiscal note, written at that time. Some of it will come from that, and some of it will come from the funding the additional funding that we, and I know we hashed it over several times during the budget discussion, but the additional funding that the administration expected to receive in fiscal 22 from tax receipts.
And do you think collectively that will add up to 25 million or so?
That's what, yes, as I say, provided there's no further large calls on that same funds. That's the danger, that we keep on trying to appropriate the same funds over and over again. But in this case, I think we're being prudent enough to make sure that doesn't happen.
And are you comfortable that it's not going to impact any of the current appropriations sent to the government agencies that we just appropriated a few months ago? Do you think that you're comfortably able to provide for their operations?
Yes, based on what I just said, yes. And as I mentioned to the Speaker, one of the things that tends to throw out that are continuing appropriations, but we're looking at that very closely. And continuing appropriations are the danger, because it's a budgeted appropriation, but doesn't necessarily generate the cash. Mm-hmm. In this case, we've got the reverse happening.
Okay, well, we'll see. I mean, it just would be good if we could get, I understand that these are proposals, but it would be good if that's something they could actually provide a breakdown of what estimated amounts would come from where. I think that would be helpful for us in the public to know what you're looking at, what you're anticipating. I mean, I think we recognize the need to help and support our business community, but we just want to make sure that obviously our existing obligations are met and we don't adversely impact the rest of the government of Guam. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to Director Burns.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Ada.
No questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Senator Titagwe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Byrne, earlier you mentioned that the $11 million that is excess revenue in the CRER report for October, and then you mentioned earlier that you're not quite sure if this is going to be because there are other things that you have to adjust, on prior year or that needs to be, paid off. Is it? And then now you're saying this 11 million is good to go?
What I was saying, Senator, is that the adjustments that have to be made, we're making in fiscal 21, and we're being very prudent about that, with the intention that none of these, and that's certainly been what I've been trying to do over the last 2 years, with the intention that no obligations flow over into the following year, because that's what tends to disrupt the finances for the following year.
You mentioned obligations. We're not talking about bills, Mr. Burns. We're talking about, obligations, exactly right. So, and this amount may be adjusted, for the CRER report for October. You said that you're still working on November right now. With PUA no longer in play, we're looking at that, the withholding that was pretty much carrying us through is no longer going to be there. What do you anticipate for December and January?
What do I anticipate?
Yeah, as far as the CRE report bleeding in more, having excess revenue or even falling short.
The report I was referring to, the CRER, that amount that's being reported is the estimate of funds over budget for the whole year. It's based upon 1 month's receipts, but it's an estimate for the whole year. I think during the budget discussions, Mr. Carlson mentioned that he expects an average of $20 million monthly for withholding receipts. And certainly for October, it was just a little bit over $20 million. As I say, we're working on November now. But I have no reason to differ from that forecast at this moment.
Mel, according to the executive order that you have here, I actually gave you a copy of it, so you can refer to it. With regards to the executive order and the funding that's coming out, that's already, Mr. Byrne already told us, it's already in the bank, ready to distribute. However, the SOPs and the applications are not complete yet, and that should be rolling out. Do you plan on using all ARP funding first before tapping into, if this bill should pass, tapping into local funds?
The speed to deploy this program as quickly as possible will likely lead to us using ARP prior to these funds. Yes, ma'am.
But nothing in here, you can actually do it either or, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Is the $500,000 for administrative costs, which you associated with $25 million, is it going to be an additional $500,000 for administrative costs for this $25 million from the local funds?
I believe it is $500,000 to come out of the ARP portion.
So no administrative costs will come out of the local side?
That's correct. I didn't think that you would all authorize that, so we didn't ask for it.
You're absolutely right.
Past experience, ma'am.
Mr. Burns, how long do you think it'll take to collect the full $25 million from local funds Because we know that, every revenue coming into the government is on a monthly basis, and then, payroll is needed to be made, et cetera, down the line. How long do you think it'll take before you can collect the full 25 million?
That's very hard to say, Senator. The monthly rate of collections can vary quite considerably. In experience, just to give you some examples, November is never usually a good collection month. Strangely enough, you'd think there'd be a lot of spending in November because it's before the holidays and Thanksgiving is there, but that generally is the case. And February generally is not a very good month. As far as expenses are concerned, the end of the year is always challenging because we have to pay the teeth and lease of 10 million in December. But I don't anticipate, when and if GIDA gives us the go-ahead, I don't anticipate there being any delays because of cash shortages.
That is for ARC funding, but local funding?
For local funding too.
So the end result is you're not quite sure when we will be able to collect the full 25 million, right?
That's the nature, unfortunately, of the beast that we're grappling with here.
Okay.
But I don't anticipate anybody having a receipt delayed. It's just like we're paying the tax refunds when I get the information from DRT. I'm more than confident that we'll pay out these payments when I get the information from GIDA.
Mr. Burns, in the budget bill that we passed, recent budget bill for FY22, it states that any excess revenue that is generated shall not be spent. A portion of that will go to tax refunds and the other to the rainy day fund. So my question is, will you still be honoring that?
I think I mentioned before that tax refunds are being paid as soon as I get the information from DRT. So I believe we're already honoring that. No one is waiting for a tax refund because there is a lack of funds.
What about the rainy day? This is excess revenue, right? So I guess it's not until the end of the year when you determine that
Yes.
for FY22
Yes.
that it's obligated, but then that means you can tap into this one. The other question I have, Mel, here on page 4 of 5 of the executive order, it says a reasonable application period, that section there, allocated program exhaust, but no line. Can you read that section C for me, please?
GIDA shall allow for a reasonable application period. Loans under the program shall be made until such time that the budget allocated for the program is exhausted, but no later than 90 days after GIDA closes the application period.
Okay. Is there any anticipation on timeline to close it, or the intent is to use the full $50 million? Or I know that the governor said that of course, the $25 million from ARP funding, but I'm not quite sure if she's going to. Well, put it this way, even you, Mr. Burns, this funding that, this $25 million, does it mean from your reading of this bill that you have to expend the full $25 million, or that you're going to take the full $25 million?
The way that we have run the small business pandemic grant programs has been we open up the application period for a window of time, at which point in time that amount is the upward limit. And so once you hit that limit, you have no monies available. And so if you keep it open and you don't meet that limit, it is not the power of GIDA that will then redirect the funds. That is beyond my pay grade.
The first $20 million that was put out by GIDA for small businesses, there was a amount that was $17 million that was paid out. So there was some additional funding that was left over. Where is that funding now?
The program is still open, Senator. So we are currently still processing applications. So it is likely that we will be utilizing from, I think the last update I gave, that was that we were at about the 17 million mark. We had taken some action since our last reporting to expand the number of applicants in the pool so that we might push more money out. In the event that we don't meet the 20 million, so in the event there's money left over, is what you're asking. Again, that's not something that GITA determines. That's determined by whomever is, in the case of ARP, that is determined by the governor.
This is the first CARES that was sent out, right? Because now we're on the second CARES of $20 million, or, right? Can you explain, Ed Camacho, can you kind of explain those two programs?
The first program was the Pandemic Assistance Grant 2020 that was funded under the CARES Act. This was to help small businesses who experienced interruption of greater than 25% as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic.
And has that closed?
Yes, that has since closed. And
What is the remaining balance?
there is no remaining balance in that particular
Expended the
account.
full 20 million?
We spent, I believe it was something like 17 million. The rest of the money was reprogrammed into another program called the Rent Assistance Grant, and this was to provide businesses with 2 months' worth of rent relief. And that program we ran with excess funds in our Small Business Pandemic Assistance Grant. And then that spilled over into the ARP because we had excess demand. So we calculated that we thought it would be a $5 or $6 million program, but we didn't have $5 million left over from the first round. So we still had excess demand of about $1.8 million. So the governor then used ARP to authorize that $1.8 million. She then authorized an additional $20 million for a second round of Small Business Pandemic Assistance Grant relief, Small Business Pandemic Assistance Grant 2021. And that is our current active program. We've thus far distributed about $17 million in awards. And we're currently wrapping that program up.
That's already ended, correct?
The deadline was yesterday, ma'am.
Do you anticipate any excess revenue after that, or not, or just any funding left over?
I think it's possible that there could be some funding left over. We've also I wanted to point out that last year when Governor Leongoro authorized the Rent Assistance Grant, there was no she had not in her original CARES Act planned for the Rent Assistance Grant, but because they were being responsive and agile to the business community's needs, they then were piecing together monies from these different programs, and so that's not that could potentially happen here. If there was excess monies that could be utilized for other small business pandemic aid, including, we are working on one right now for new small businesses, like an incubator type of program. We are also working on a farmers assistance grant program. We're also working, we're working on a number of different initiatives that could certainly be funded if there were excess monies in this program.
Is that CARES Act funding?
This is ARP funding. All of this is ARP. This that we're referencing now is ARP.
Mel, when are you going to know what the balance will be after that second program of CARES? And both programs are for small businesses, correct? The one for 2021 and then the one that you had earlier, right? Both for small businesses?
Last year's Pandemic Assistance Grant 2020, the Commercial Rent Relief Grant, the healthcare grants that we've done, the daycare grants, and the Small Business 2021.
20 million. I'm just talking about 20 million, 20 million, those two. What are
These have all been for small businesses, yes, ma'am.
So $40 million already for small business by GITA, correct?
That's correct.
Senator Taiwo, your time has expired. Senator
Thank you,
San
Mr.
Augustine.
Chair.
Thank you,
Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Mr. Chair. A few questions. Mr. Byrne, are you confident that the Department of Administration or the executive branch can find the 25 million to make sure that this program, if passed, is supported?
Yes, Senator, as I said, I'm confident, provided there's no further calls.
Understood.
As we understand it.
I understood that. I just need to hear the confidence on the executive branch. On the GITA side, the 25 million that the governor has committed through the ARP to fund this program, separate from this bill, what is the clock in using that first 25 million? Is it like, you can use, whatever, $1 million today, $1 million tomorrow, and so forth? I don't know.
Thank you for that question, Senator. Normally, when we open up the window for the grant applications, it's a first come, first served type of situation, but we do assign staff on kind of they start coming in on the weekends and such, so we can process as quickly as possible. Generally, the bulk of the funds are obligated within the first month.
They're obligated, but when does the money start going out? What I'm trying to look at, Mel, is as the administration, let's hypothetically say this bill passes. I'm in support of this bill. I'm here to support the local employers assistance program, period. If this bill passes and you start off the first 25 million, and it starts moving, the application, everybody goes through it, and while the executive branch is trying to put this 25 million together, what is the clock we're looking at where when you start issuing, because you can obligate, but you didn't issue. It's kind of like, I write the check, but I haven't issued it. The 25 million is still sitting in your account. Is it going to happen within 30 days, within 60 days, when check starts flowing? I'm estimating maybe longer and maybe shorter, but I just like to know. And the reason why is because that clock that you start on the first 25, we'll have to make sure the other 25 is ready to go to pick up the other groups of folks that need assistance. So maybe you can explain that, please.
Yes, that's a very keen observation, Senator, that the clock starts from the time that we receive a grant or loan application. We will then endeavor to process that application as quickly as possible. We then batch it down to the Department of Administration. Let's say that entire process takes approximately 5 days. From there, the Department of Administration then transmits, or they then are responsible for cutting the check. If the money is available, the checks can be cut within a week usually. So the whole process for somebody applying could be a week to 2 weeks. However, if for some reason, similar to our rent assistance, we had a situation in the past, our rent assistance grant, wherein demand exceeded the amount of monies available. We still processed, we still approved, but their approvals were pending funds availability, at which point in time we just worked with the administration to identify those funds and eventually pay that money out. What was important to the organization, to GITA, was to, and to the administration, was to keep in touch with these businesses, to keep them apprised of where we were as far as the stage of the process. And I reiterate, this is exactly why we're at the point of, this is exactly why we requested at this level of funding, was because we wanted to make sure, we wanted to ensure that the likelihood of being able to fulfill all the requests, we wanted to make that there was a great likelihood that we'd be able to fulfill these requests, as opposed to having a situation where there's excess demand and then we're looking around after the fact and businesses already have this expectation that they're going to be receiving some aid.
All right. Now, Mr. Burns, because you're very, very knowledgeable, when a dollar is spent and it hits the economy, it comes around, there's it's a triple effect. A dollar becomes 2, 3, 4, next thing you know, they pay the taxes, it comes in, you take a look at it, you look at the budget projection, then whatever money is available, then it goes to the program and it starts to add up. And I heard you say that sometimes in December, the budget shortfalls, yeah, we pay bills, and in January, and so forth. But we're anticipating that once we can kick this going, and if the clock starts right, and this program gets passed, which I'm really hoping this bill gets passed, we're actually looking at, because we're already in December, so we already anticipate that it could be in January, that everything gets started. In January, February, March, everybody's thinking that, well, we won't have a lot of money. Well, I don't know, I'm very positive. I want to look at it very positive. People are out there in the stores. People are buying. Go to Home Depot, it's empty, the shelves. For Christmas gifts. decorations, and so forth. But I'm just anticipating that, and you're confident that we'll have the funds to cover the 25 million, correct? Without tapping any agency, because it's quite obvious some of my colleagues are fearful of that.
Yes, yes, Senator, and understandably so. But we've not had to turn away any agency, certainly in the first 2 months of this financial year, and I don't really think that it's likely that we're going to for the remaining 10 months. We've not had to turn away any agency because of lack of funding for the programs that are appropriated in the budget. And if I may comment on what you were saying earlier about the money recirculating, these funds, together with all other funds that have been paid out to businesses, we issue a 1099-G, and it's treated as revenue. Well, the businesses in receipt of those funds need to report it as revenue on their tax returns because it is revenues to them. These are replacement revenues from other sources, but they're coming from the government, and the taxes thereon will return to the government.
Thank you, sir. And I think one thing we're missing here is even from the beginning when we started this bill and we're talking about revenue, nobody's ever mentioned about the infrastructure bill that was passed by Congress. There's going to be money coming our way. That's going to hit the market. It's going to stir the economy. It's going to come back as a revenue. Revenue that was not projected in the budget to start with. And then if the Build Better movement does succeed, there's going to be more money coming to Guam. I mean, that's all over the newspaper. There is money coming to Guam, never projected. And if that is true and it hits the island, it's revenue never projected that can be used to succeed or to ensure that this bill is funded and any other future bill. So I'd like to just thank you for providing that information. Thank you, Mel, for providing that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Agustin. That is the end of round one. We'll go to round two now. I'll begin with the middle row, starting with Senator Ada.
No questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Senator Brown.
You'd mentioned earlier that the federal funds would be used. With regards to the guidelines of how the businesses, I'm sure you already have a set format on what the process would be of businesses that can apply for this, how they can be eligible, and how can you properly determine that they're using the money for the intended purpose. Can you, Edgita, outline what that process is and what would a potential business have to go through or fill in or qualify for in order to be eligible for these funds?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. I'm happy to be able to have a chance to address the body and discuss that process. And so with the Small Business Pandemic Assistance Grant 2021 that was authorized by Governor Leon Guerrero, we have been able to obtain approximately 1,700 applications from local businesses. This includes an application, current business license, as well as GRT filings from 2019, 2020, 2021, the first 6 months of 2021. It is our desire to keep the process as easy and streamlined for the businesses as possible. So what we'd like to do is we have updated the application. Now the application has all of the sort of the legal statements as far as this is what you can use the money for, this is what you can't use the money for, et cetera, sign here that you understand. We can pre-calculate and we can predetermine the amount that is available to them under this program because we already have their GRT information input into our system. And from there, what we would do is, because similar to PPP, this is a loan with a forgiveness component attached to it, we'd be asking them to come in to sign a promissory note, at which point in time we'd explain to them that in the event that they use the 60% or so of the money towards employment costs, then the entire loan can be forgiven. And then for the even smaller businesses, we have an even easier process because we're not requiring that they demonstrate the 60%. The one differentiating factor between this and all of our previous grant programs is because it is an assistance program geared towards our most vulnerable of businesses, we are looking for a very aggressive business interruption of approximately 50%. Our programs in 2020 and 2021 have helped over 2,000 businesses, as when you spread out the money to many, many businesses, you have to spread it out and give them a smaller award. We are looking for targeted strategic assistance to this industry that remains in critical condition. And of note, across the United States, different communities utilized PPP, EIDL, and any kind of local assistance. But many of their tourism industries have since rebounded with domestic travel. Here in Guam, we have a very unique position in that all of our visitors are from Asia. And as such, we are subject to the limitations that they have with regard to returning to their home countries and facing in-home quarantine or their home country quarantine procedures. So as a result, it's taken longer for our tourism industry to recover. And so thereby, that's really what led to the creation of this program, really to help our businesses and to help our most vulnerable businesses who are suffering, who have experienced the greatest level of interruption. And when we look at interruption, we look at it objectively through numbers. Interruption between 2019 and 2020. We have a lot of the information already. We believe that this would improve the speed with which we're able to give out awards. And then it's really a matter of making sure that they reaffirm that they understand the program, understand their obligations, and sign accordingly. We also, just as with regard to the previous programs, we did actually do an internal, in addition to the federal compliance requirements, we do an internal audit. So we look at about, 10 to 15% or so of our applicants, and we'll spot check after we dole out the funds. We'll ask them to provide us with supporting documentation and such that we can reaffirm that they've used the money for what they said they're going to use the money for. So thus far, we're a little early on in the auditing process of previous awards, but it seems to be going okay.
Do you have a general amount that you're going to be distributing, or a cap amount, so that you can maximize? Obviously these businesses all come in different shapes and sizes. Do you already have or have decided, is there going to be a cap amount on how much can be distributed to any particular business so that you have an opportunity to spread more of the money around? And then the question I have after that is, with the programs you've already put in place with federal funding and already distributed, what has been the percentage of participation? How much funds have been distributed, and are there remaining funds that are still eligible for qualified businesses to participate?
Certainly. So what we've been doing is, so based on the data that we already have collected from our previous grant programs, that is how we forecasted the level of award for this particular grant program. For employees, for companies who have, when we met with the stakeholders on 3 separate occasions, so we met with over 60 stakeholders from various areas of the community, but most especially our tourism community, there was a resounding desire to help some of our very small micro businesses in tourism, so 4 employees or less. And so we've split our program into helping so there's the 4 employees or less category and the greater than 4 employees category. The 4 employees or less category, they don't have as stringent requirements with regard to meeting the payroll requirement, and they also have a cap of, we calculated $50,000 as their cap. For the businesses with greater than 5 employees, we're looking at a cap of anywhere from $250,000 to $400,000. We're refining the numbers on that. Again, we're looking at businesses who have experienced tremendous interruption, so 50% or greater, or a covered establishment where like a vaccination mandate has affected their ability to conduct their business, carry out their business. With regard to the previous programs, your question on the previous programs, in 2020, the Small Business Pandemic Assistance Grant funded under the CARES Act, we did about 2,500 awards, about 2,300 awards, totaling about 17 million? Thank you. $17 million. And then in 2021, we did the Small Business Pandemic. That's the one we're in right now. And there's fewer awards, 13. Maybe about 15 altogether. Yeah, probably about 1,500 awards, totaling about 17 17 million today, we'll probably approach 18 million by the time the program sort of closes up. And then in addition, we've done some smaller grant programs throughout the pandemic. So we did one for daycares, we did one for healthcare, for clinics. We've also, one was authorized for rent assistance for brick and mortar businesses. And so there's never really a shortage of work for us as far as being able to push out more money out via direct aid to small businesses.
Just one more, just to clarify, you mentioned that if the business used about 60% of what they received for, this is for payroll for their employees, if their employees were impacted, then they're pretty much forgiven the loan and they can move forward without any obligation back to the government.
That's correct. Our desire is that this program will look very similar from our time spent with the stakeholders. What they asked for was something similar to PPP, and with PPP there was a forgiveness component that was tied to employment and payroll, and so we thought that that would be very good and realistic to ask for again, especially as we rebuild tourism. When our visitors come back, they have to go to places that have staff. And so we thought if we could give our businesses a leg up to pay for payroll, then that would help them out.
And just one last question. With regards to the percentages of those cases that you reviewed, have you seen general compliance with regards to the requirements of the program so far, of what you've reviewed already and tested, so to speak?
Yes, I think the ones that we've tested, we've had very good results from. Because we recognize, we reiterate this over and over, this is not our money, this is federal money. And if you can't produce the documents, you need to pay the money back. That's in their attestation that we ask them to fill out as well, that any non-compliance results in the use of, or in returning of funding.
So then I assume ultimately when you distribute the program, ultimately you're going to go through all the applications and verify that they've indeed used the money for its intended purpose? Will you do a total review of all the funds paid out?
I think we will do our best to review as many as practical and as we're able to, as many as we're able to review in a timely amount of time for reporting purposes, of course.
I assume the same standards will apply for local funds that are going to be used if this legislation moves forward?
Yes, most definitely. Most definitely. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I appreciate you responding to the questions. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Shelton. Senator Perez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a follow-up question for Director Byrne. So initially you were saying, or earlier you were saying that you feel confident that there is money available. Can you just provide a breakdown of where this money would be coming from and how much?
Well, I think you can see from the bill that 25 million is coming from ARPA funds, and we already have that funding. The local element that I've been asked questions several times before, the local element is coming from the general fund, and the general fund will have funds available from a mixture of availability from fiscal 21 and availability from fiscal 22. I guess it's kind of fortunate that the legislature didn't appropriate more funding in the budget from the estimated collections for fiscal 22, because that's now available to fund this bill.
Okay. Do you have an estimate of the amount? So you're saying we're going to get funds from 2021 and 2022 from collections.
Yeah.
Do you have an estimate of how much that is?
Well, the fiscal note, and the fiscal note's out of date now, but the fiscal note talked about 19.8 million coming from fiscal 21. If we assume that the war claims are going to account for 10 million of that, there's 9.8 million from fiscal 21, which means you've got to have 16 million from fiscal 22.
So you're saying you're confident that we're going to, so whatever money we collect for 2022, basically we're going to take that and use that for this. And perhaps, I guess, when the next budget cycle comes, then we would have to remove that from the budget cycle. Is that correct? For the 2023 budget?
Well, the next budget cycle will deal with 2023 revenues, so it really, it won't impact fiscal 23, because I think, as Ms. Mendiola said, this is all going to get paid out fairly quickly, which means in fiscal 22.
So then what I'm hearing is there's a potential that there might be agencies that could be impacted.
I don't believe so, and I don't see why.
Yeah, because we already appropriated the money for 2022, unless we have excess funds coming through.
Yeah, yes, the CRER, which I was talking about earlier to senators, the CRER that we've just issued, or we issued some weeks ago, which was the first one for fiscal 22, the EBMR expects, just based on one month's collections, expects that revenues will exceed budgeted revenues by about 11.5 million. And I see no reason, because you recall that it was the position of the administration during the course of the budget discussions that the legislature underestimated, I'm sure they thought they were being prudent, underestimated the amount of revenues that would accrue in fiscal 22. And it looks like that, the administration was pretty close to the mark on their assessment of the revenues for 22, as just based upon 1 month's receipts.
You mentioned 11 million. Where did you get that number from?
From the CRER, it's the projected revenues in excess of appropriated revenues for fiscal 22.
Okay, because the fiscal note that came with this bill said 19.8 million, but we're going to subtract 10 million for the war claims, which leaves 9.8 million. But you just mentioned that there's 11 million. Where did you get that number from?
From the CRER for October for fiscal 22.
So that's excess.
That's surplus revenues.
Okay, is that general fund or special fund? And how did special fund look like?
It's general funds.
Okay, and then the special fund, is there also a decrease?
There is a decrease in special funds, but it's fairly small and nothing like the decrease that we experienced. Well, when I say decrease, a shortage is nothing like the shortage that we experienced in 21, because we were, and I recall Mr. Carlson saying this too, we were very conservative in estimating the revenues for the special funds because of the shortage that we experienced in fiscal 21.
So what's the net amount? So what was the, for the October, what is the special fund loss?
Their projected loss is something around 2 million.
2 million, you said?
2 million, yes.
Okay, so that would be a net of 9 million?
That would be, well, yes. That, just based upon that 1 month, yes, that would be the case. But as I say, it was
the time is running, excuse
yeah,
me?
It was the position of the administration that general fund revenues would run ahead, but not special fund revenues.
So what would you estimate? So it's tracking, there definitely is a trend, right? So what is the trend showing?
The trend is showing just what I just said. The CRER shows the tracking, and that's the trend.
Yeah, because budgets are for the whole year, so we can't just go quarter to quarter and say, okay, this is what we're going to have. So if we're going lower, it seems like it's trending lower, or it's decreasing lower every CRER report. Okay, time, please. Yeah, thanks.
Senator, I'm referring to page 3 of the October general fund. The CRER is just the general fund. It shows that adopted revenues are 706 million point eight, and that revenue tracking is 718.4.
So, yeah, the one thing I'm concerned is that the effect of PUA, right? So PUA is what kind of contributed to, maybe we didn't factor that into the budget. But now that PUA has ended, you know, I would expect to see less revenues coming through. So I guess we run the risk of potentially shortchanging some of these agencies. Is that correct? If the revenues don't continue to exceed our expectations.
Yes, but as I said to some of the senators earlier, and I'll say, you know, I welcome the opportunity to say it again. I don't believe that there's much of a risk. Yes, PUA is a program that's completed, but there are many other federal programs running, and some of them are running not even fully running at their full capacity. As you know, we have a rental assistance program, and we've only just started to impact the funding that's available, the federal funding that's available for that. We have a mortgage assistance program, and we're waiting for Treasury to approve our final submission. And between those two programs, that's 50 million. And in addition to that, we've just got an infrastructure bill that looks like we're going to get, and the rules haven't been written for this yet, but we're anticipating 150 million, 200 million from the infrastructure bill, and the final bill that's still in Congress is also going to give us some more funding. So, I would ask you to consider there's a large amount of federal funding which is going to come to Guam, which will certainly circulate in the economy and will support the tax base.
Okay, thank you for the responses. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Senator Moylan. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll go to the back, yes. Senator Tidegui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Byrne, I think when you mentioned that comment that, the legislature was being very frugal, in estimating for 2022, and we're starting to see a surplus. I think the reason is that because, we want to be conservative and make sure that we have the funding to pay our payroll, to pay what needs to be done. But I did estimate, can you tell me how much in FY 2021 in special funds that was in the negative total?
We haven't yet finished the preparation of the financial statements, but the shortfall in revenues, which is easily ascertained in special funds, was about $20 million.
$20 million,
yes.
Right? Okay. It's quite a bit. Okay. Mel, you mentioned earlier about how you're processing these applications that are coming in, and what I'm concerned about is that you mentioned as you were talking about how some businesses will get more than others because it's based on their type of work. Who oversees and decides who gets how much or who's entitled to more than the other businesses?
The calculation of the award is formulaic. It is based on business interruption.
It's all based on business interruption, so you're not going to be giving your best friend more money than the other guy who's obviously in the same need. So there is a formula.
Clearly.
Okay, and is it very transparent for everyone to see?
Yes.
Okay. The other question I have is, will these be part of nonprofit organizations or vape shops or churches or stuff? Will they be available to this funding?
Nonprofits are not eligible for this type of funding.
The LEAP? Okay. What about So everything else, doesn't matter, businesses, right?
You have an active business license, you file your GRTs, it's not a passive. There are other exclusions. The exclusions are similar to, I believe we, in the public hearing, we put in a presentation that may have discussed ineligible business types, passive investments, for example, if a holding company, commercial landlords are not eligible.
I'm sorry, the last one?
Commercial landlords
Or not?
or residential landlords, not eligible.
Okay. Okay. All right, will there be, so even if they don't have employees, so let's say they don't have any employees, it's just them themselves, will they have, because it's a loan, you know, and if they don't meet the 60/40, how does that work?
So for those who have fewer than 4 employees, again, it is based on interruption, and they are not subject to the 60% requirement with regard to demonstration, to the demonstration of use for payroll. Because when a business is under 4 employees, it was the consensus among the stakeholders was that an under 4 employee business is generally being run by the principal, and the principal and the employee are one and the same.
Right. You explained earlier that this is a loan, but then it would be, what is that word?
Forgiven?
Forgiven, thank you. Thank you. Forgiven. How is this reimbursed then? In the event it's not forgiven and you're using federal ARP funding, it goes back to that, but what about its local funding? How is it reimbursed there?
Sure. The promissory note, well, first off, the objective is that all recipients under this program will seek forgiveness. And even if they don't think that they can spend that 60%, let's say we calculate a maximum award of business, and the maximum award is $100,000. And we say to them, you must use $60,000 for payroll. And they say to us, I don't think I could use $60,000 for payroll. Then what we say to them is, well, you can take less, and then from there, 60. So if your award is you're eligible for $100,000, you must use $60,000 for payroll. And then the business owner says, I don't think I can use $60,000 for payroll. Okay. Well, what if you can lower the amount of your award to $50,000, at which point in time, 60% of $50,000 is $30,000. Can you use that towards payroll? Yes, I can. So the objective is really for forgiveness for all of the recipients under this program. Having said that, if somebody wanted to utilize this as a loan instead, with regard to paying it back at this juncture, we are able to put it into a dedicated account, and then from there we can use it to give out more of the same. We can open the pot, we can open the pool of funding wider to help more businesses following the same formula.
And the formula really that you're, putting your SOP together and all that is formulating from the PPP program, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And when is the SOP going to be completed? I'm sorry, I might have...
We are looking to adopt the SOP at our board meeting on Thursday.
Oh, Thursday, okay. You've already started receiving applications?
No, usually the SOP comes first, and then the application is launched, et cetera, because the SOP then kind of dictates the flow of work.
I'm sure you're getting a lot of people calling already in, waiting for the application.
Most
right?
definitely. The tourism industry in particular is eagerly awaiting this program.
Okay. Let me go to the executive order. It says here on page 4 to 5, instituting a system of reporting and record retention to include audible certificate to ensure accountability. Can you explain how that process is going to go?
Certainly. Well, what we've done for the previous programs that we've been running, all of the records are retained at GITA, and we also have, I had mentioned this earlier, that we have, with Senator Brown's question, we also have, as you're well aware, as a former employee of GITA, we have a compliance department, And the compliance department, what they do is they periodically, they take a sample of those who are participating in the program, and they look at it to ensure compliance. We're also subject, of course, the OPA recently requested some documentation to perform for an audit. We also have the audit requirement under the department, with the Department of Administration. So there's multiple layers of.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yep, you're right. I remember the conversation now. Thank you, Mel. Mel, in the event that, because you're seeing, especially in the first CARES, the CARES program that was first brought out, the first one, I call it the 1 and the 2, right? And then it was closed. And you still had funding left over. In the event you go through this whole process and then you only get maybe 1,500 applications, which amounted already for what, about 20 million right now, or 17 million, and then nothing else is coming in at this point. Will you just keep this open until for whenever, till it's fully expended? I know I brought that up last time, but I just wanted to clarify.
Sure. So as I believe, as we had discussed during the public hearing, this is meant for our businesses who are the most vulnerable, who have been hurt the most by the pandemic. And what we're looking at to demonstrate that is interruption. So we're starting with businesses who've experienced an interruption of at least 50%, or businesses who have been affected by a vaccination mandate, for example, a restaurant, where unless you're vaccinated, you cannot eat, you can't eat inside that restaurant. In the event that we are, let's say, 45 days into the program, and it's kind of sluggish out the gate, then normally what we do is every month we tell our board members what's going on with the program. And if it seems kind of sluggish, then what we'd then do is we'd open it up a little further. So we'd say, instead of a 50% level of interruption, you only need 40% or 30% or 20%. This is why I think the nice thing about this program is it's flexible insofar as if the money's made available and we don't use it all, you can open the gate. It doesn't shut people out. What it does is it prioritizes those that are hurting the most.
So the intention, right, Mel, is just to utilize the full $50 million in any way possible, right?
That's correct.
What happens if you have businesses opening, as we're starting to see, there's rumors stating that, even in the U.S., everything is going to go back to normal, regardless. How is it going to work out then? In other words, you have the, still, let's say, $25 million left. We come into January and everything has been lifted, even the masks have been lifted, things like that, and we're out of an emergency.
Just because a business has opened their doors doesn't mean they're not still suffering from the impact of being closed for 2 years. And so this is meant to address this is in part meant to address that. So it's meant to help them ramp up, but it's also to help them catch up. So
and
even
a lot of them have been
if we have 1
receiving-
million tourists that come through our doors, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Senator.
okay.
If we have 1 million, 1.5 million tourists that come through our doors in 2022, we would be very, very happy. And would we I think if to answer your question, would we run an active program into late of 2022 if the economy is fully recovered? I think that would be, we could certainly keep it open for longer, but with our experience, all of our grant programs, the majority of the funds are drawn down within the first few months of running the program. So it's not our projection for this program to still be open beyond the first quarter of 2022.
Do you take in consideration if anybody has taken any kind of other grants from other federal programs? Or it doesn't matter if they've availed themselves to something else from SBA or another program?
That's a very good question, Senator. As of yet, what we're looking at is an offset for, an award offset for anyone who has received RRF, which is the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, or SVOG, which is the Shuttered Venue Operation Fund, operational grant. And that is because those two particular federal programs were used to make businesses whole for the year that they were most affected by the pandemic. And so that then reduces the size of their potential award. So yes, to answer your question, yes, there are offsets that are looked at. We don't look at our pandemic assistant grant 2020 and 2021, the GITA grants, primarily because they were not large. They were not large enough to really constitute a tremendous impact to the bottom line of a business from one year to the next.
And thank you, Mel, and thank you, Ed, too, for information that you provided earlier, and appreciate always, taking our call and answering our questions today. And I thank you, Mr. Burns, for being here too as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Moylan. Senator Duenas.
Jesus Masi, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Byrne, I think this is just something maybe for our comfort level. The precedents that has happened with other capped appropriations. So just for the record, I know that this has been reported before, but how was the excess under the program, the RISE Act? How was the excess above the cap of 30 million paid for?
Like anything else, it came from the general fund, but it wasn't a huge amount of money.
My understanding was ARP was used for that.
It may well have been. I actually don't recall, but
yeah.
I will take a look.
Okay. And I just say that because I think that, hopefully that precedence will be established here as well. That I think the prudent thing to do in case general fund revenues weren't tracking would be to use what many of us believe should be the primary funding source, ARP.
Yeah, we issued the ARP plan a couple of weeks ago, but it is fluid because it's a 4-year program basically, and conditions can certainly change within that 4 years. So I know the administration is always open to, and has been, if necessary, changing the amounts between the categories, and the federal government understands that, and the federal government, in fact, agrees with that.
Thank you. Mel, just to circle back one final, because I know there's been many questions in terms of, I think it's important too that we just put this on the record as well, that when the resolution came out from the legislature regarding the LEAP issue of trying to move towards this, funding this LEAP program, it was because the businesses that came to the governor and came to the legislature, particularly in the tourism industry, were those that had difficulty qualifying for some of the shuttered programs, some of the PPE programs, payment protection programs, and some of the others. And so there really has been, and I think this is just important for what this legislature is doing too, and the governor's office, is I just wanted you to speak one more time. I mean, I know those folks have come to you directly, and that's why I kind of was asking on the preparation of getting this money rolling, because they're really at the end of their ability to sustain themselves, and that's the primary reason and the driver, I know, that when these particular businesses came to the legislature and came to the governor, pleading was to be able to find another funding source to be able to support them outside of programs that other businesses like the arts and some of the other tourism related, they really fell under a special category of federal monies that really helped them that others were excluded from. So I just wanted to put that on the record and say, I mean, I know you're working with them directly, and those guys definitely are prepared to submit their documents to you when this becomes law, correct? I appreciate that, because I just think that there's, it really is a focused effort. It's these are operations that are optional tours that without them, it's going to be so difficult to have a visitor experience if we can't do what we're doing now. So I just wanted to put that on the record. So just mostly, Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
Senator, just to clarify what I just said, the All Rise Act, there was 38 million allocated from the ARP funds, and we spent 36.4 million.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne.
Senator Torres. Senator Nelson.
I yield my time to the speaker.
Sorry, Senator Nelson?
I yield my time to the speaker.
Speaker?
Thank you very much, Senator Nelson. And thank you, Mr. Chair. So of course I understand the intent of this legislation and that businesses, particular ones, and specifically their employees, have been negatively impacted by the pandemic, by the mandates over the last year and a half of this public health emergency. And of course, it's important for us, as the legislature, to ensure that we're going to use our resources wisely, make decisions that will benefit the most vulnerable populations. And so the two issues that I have that, the questioning that I'm doing is based on one, that the governor has received over $600 million in federal funds and ARP funds in particular for exactly these types of purposes to help businesses that have been impacted by the pandemic. That's $600 million. She allocated $25 million for a program that Gita's telling us requires $50 million, that they won't even begin it until they are assured of $50 million, that they won't even give out the first $25 million that they already have transferred to them. The second issue is that this bill wants $25 million from our general fund revenues. And, it's our job to confirm whether those revenues are indeed available, whether those revenues are, if we take them from the general fund, despite special fund shortfalls, despite it being very early in the fiscal year, we've only got 1 month worth of CRER reports so far, are these agencies going to be able to complete their missions, especially the ones that were not given full budgets because they were relying on receiving additional funds? So the ARP fund report for November 2021 showed allocation of funds for the ARP funds of $569 million. So far it shows $25 million for the LEAP, $20 million for business economic support. This is the Gita Small Business Pandemic Grant. $5 million for economic diversity initiatives, $1.8 million for rent relief, and $1 million to Gita for administrative fees to implement the LEAP. That's $1 million. And the small business, $1 million to Gita to implement the LEAP and the small business pandemic grant program. That's about $52 million to Gita for small businesses and economic development. But if you add up the federal and the local programs for businesses have received about $494,600,000 in grants and forgivable loans in the last year and a half. So I just want to make sure if this money is indeed necessary for these businesses, and I think it is necessary for sure for those employees who are hurting, but I want to ensure that indeed that ARP is not available for this. It seems like the most sensible funding source for a program like this. There's $31 million in quarantine and isolation facilities allocation in the report. Mr. Byrne, are we expecting to be reimbursed from FEMA for this quarantine and isolation $31 million?
That was discussed earlier in the week with FEMA, Senator. There is an expectation that we are going to recover some money from FEMA, but not the total amount that was spent. And the reason for that is FEMA has certain restrictions on the amount that they go to reimburse. And they're working through the reports now to determine exactly the amount that we're expected to receive.
Well, I'm hoping that we can take whatever amount is going to be reimbursed out of $31 million. That would definitely be able to cover what Gita wants for this program, that additional $25 million.
Yes,
There's
that's true, but we're here looking at forecasts, and I would certainly hope.
That's right.
And I'll work whatever we need to do to get that FEMA money, but
All
I
right.
can't
That's good.
anticipate it.
We heard Public Health during the FY22 budget hearings in May say they were going to request $17,800,000 in ARP funds to assist with about $14 million in shortfalls to services in their Public Welfare Division, Senior Citizens Division, and Environmental Health Divisions. They provided a chart at the budget hearing on how those ARP funds would be used. For $365,000 for general admin, $2.9 million for environmental health, $1.1 million for public health, $7 million for senior citizens, $6.3 million for public welfare. I've asked Public Health for an update on the ARP funding, but haven't received information yet. But in the ARP report, it shows that $11.9 million is allocated to public health. And I'm wondering if you could tell us specifically what that will be used for, the 11.9 out of the 17.8 they asked for, and the $6 million that they still had asked for, if that is going to be funded.
Yes, Senator, I don't recall exactly what went into the amount that was allocated to public health, but I do recall there was a shortage on the foster care medical insurance. There were some departments, I think it was senior citizens and child protection, that weren't fully funded because it was expected that there was going to be federal funding available. And so those were those, I believe, were the recipients of some of this funding. But those, I think, were the major programs that benefited from this. And as you know, public health has a good deal of federal funds beyond the ARPA available funding that's due to them on a normal ongoing basis. And there was some money, and I'm not sure it was exactly the balance to 7 million, but there was a sum of money that was identified as being available to them for these programs from other federal funds.
So does that mean they will not be getting the $6 million from ARP funds, the additional 6 to make up the total that they had requested?
Not from ARP funds, because they were instructed to take the money from other federal funds. You know, they get about $230 million in federal funds each year.
Yes, but many of those federal funds are allocated for specific purposes.
Yes, that's true.
So that's why I want to know, the shortfalls that continue to exist in these agencies are our responsibility with local funds. With the infrastructure bill that was passed, Guam is poised to receive about $194 million in funding for road, transit, other related projects. Are there plans to reallocate some of this ARP funding that is currently earmarked for roads, like the $23 million currently allocated to DPW, or and use the infrastructure funds instead, and that way we can use the $23 million allocated to DPW for this LEAP program?
Well, as I just said in response to Senator here, it's a fluid amount and can be reallocated, but our understanding, and this was one of the things that we were dealing with in our recent trip to DC, that one of the things that we understand is that the infrastructure funding is not going to come immediately like this did. It's going to take time to come, because all the federal agencies involved in this have to write the rules, and these are complicated rules. So I'm not expecting the infrastructure funding to come as quickly as the ARP funding has come, and it may well be that we started spending this for roads, because roads need repair now, before the funds come in from the infrastructure bill. But like FEMA, if it's available to be reallocated back, we will do that.
Sure. Or the ARP could go to LEAP, and that could be expended now instead of her waiting for additional funds. And what about the $31 million for the quarantine and isolation? Do you have an estimate of how much will be reimbursed?
The amount that I believe will be reimbursed is about $11.5 million.
Only $11 million? That means the rest were not qualified for reimbursement?
Yes, because of the rules that FEMA imposed. But you may be sure, Senator Speaker, that we're going to do whatever we can to maximize the amount, and I certainly will work to make sure that it's as much as we get back as much as possible.
We were always assured that we would be fully reimbursed for quarantine and isolation. Okay, so Mr. Byrne, we were asked that instead of relying on the FY21 CRER or the fiscal note, which stated that there's 19.8 million unobligated general fund revenues at the end of FY21, before the 10 million in war claims, or a balance of 9.8 million in unobligated general fund revenues for FY21, that we should instead be confident in a mix of FY21 and FY2 revenues in a general fund balance. And I'm putting that in quotes because that's the first time that term's been used in our budget proceeding, general fund balance. So I'm asking you, what is the unobligated general fund balance available for additional appropriation as of today?
Well, that's what we're working on in completing the financial statements. As I think I did attempt to answer this was before, is that we recognized, and if we start from that number, we recognized that we had an excess revenues over the budgetary appropriation of 60 million. In answer to Senator Taitugui, I indicated that there's about 20 million that needs to be reallocated to special funds, because the general fund is basically responsible for everything in the end. So those special funds need to be made whole. Otherwise, that deficit runs into the subsequent year, and the agencies, and there are agencies that rely upon those special funds only, will be severely shortchanged. We are assuming that there are going to be, because that's what was built into the budget, an amount, and we're working on that now, so I can't be too specific about that, an amount that we have to take into account for continuing appropriations. Departments...
What do you estimate that to be?
We're working on that now. I don't want to be too specific, because I think you're aware, that departments are required to report to you prior obligations. They don't actually report it to me, but I look on the website to see what's coming in order to add up the total. And the other unknown that we're just dealing with, we've just closed fiscal 21 accounts payable, and so we're putting all those into the system, and we're trying to be as prudent as possible to make sure that we accrue everything that we can. Those two numbers are still unknown to us, so I can't be specific about that. But even taking into account all that, I'm assuming that we're going to end up with some surplus as a result of taking account into all those things. I'm as anxious to you to be prudent.
How much, Mr. Byrne?
How much?
What's the amount?
It's too early to say, but I think we, I don't want to be, held to an amount too much, but I think it's going to be of the order of 20 million.
Say that again?
I think it's going to be the order of about 20 million.
20 million? So 20 million from FY21?
From FY21.
Is that only FY21?
Yes,
okay.
It's only FY21. But please, I hope everybody recognizes that there may well be some unknowns that we have to take account of yet. We haven't yet got the report from the Attorney General of any legal claims that might be adduced against us. So that number might change from day to day.
Will GITA be transferring the leftover balances from its other programs into this program?
That's not GITA's call.
Whose call is it?
It's the governor's.
Would the governor be transferring the leftover balances from GITA's earlier programs into this program? There's money available because they weren't fully expended in the other programs. Can those be transferred into this, Mr. Byrne?
If there's an underspend in one category in the ARP funds, yes, it is a candidate for transfer to another program. I mean, we certainly don't want to return any money to the Treasury. We want to spend all the federal monies that we have. You know, we've got 4 years to do it, so
Yes,
we
but
can be
we also
deliberate.
want to try not to expend the general funds if we don't have to, if we have this federal funds available and still available.
Well, that's been one
what
of the
we want to
hallmarks
do.
of the administration, is that it's been able to maximize its take on of federal funds, and that's one of the, and I think I've said this to many people, this is one of the reasons why we have been able to report a surplus in the last 2 years, is that we have been pretty successful in getting and transferring costs to federal funding.
All right, well, there's a lot of unknowns that have been stated here. We don't know how much we're going to be reimbursed. We don't know how much in ARP funds, you know, are still available to us. It looks like there is enough available in ARP funds to account for the 25 million, especially if you add up the amounts that are left over from the other programs that GITA has run, and that this program can be entirely funded by ARP without jeopardizing the general funds, without impeding usage of the general funds to take care of the shortfalls in agencies and to make sure that these agencies meet their mission. But you're saying today, and I'm glad to have it on the record, that we have a $20 million, an estimated, prior to audit, available unobligated general fund balance of about 20 million. And then you've talked about an 11.5 million excess funds in the first month of FY22. I just wanted to, it's kind of funny. I don't know if you remember, Mr. Byrne, when I was trying to appropriate at the very end of FY21, the excess revenues already accounted for in 11 months of FY21. Many people claimed that was reckless, that was not responsible, that was risky. And we were already at 11 months, or 10 months and 11 months. And so we're here at 1 month, and we're going to appropriate the 11 and a half minus 2, that's 9, based on 1 month.
Yes, I think it depends which end of the telescope you're looking at.
Well, I was trying to increase that amount because I want to put it to refunds as well, and I want to make sure that that happens. So that's why, again, we can't use ARP funds for refunds. I would like to keep the refunds flowing. I would like to prevent the usage of general funds if possible, and I think it's absolutely possible, and there's no reason why this program can't be funded out of the ARP. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We've concluded the second round, and so we will take a brief recess to dismiss the members of the panel before we move on to the third and final round for amendments. We'll stand at recess for a few minutes.